The air in my kitchen always smelled of something. Cinnamon and apples in the fall, slow-roasted garlic and rosemary in the winter, bright citrus and basil in the summer. It was a living, breathing place, the true heart of my home, not just four walls and appliances. It was where my children scraped knees and came for comfort, where secrets were shared over warm cookies, where celebrations were prepared and tears were wiped away. It was my domain, a space I had cultivated and perfected over decades, pouring love and tradition into every simmering pot and flaky crust. My hands knew the worn handles of the pots, the cool grain of the countertop, the exact temperature the old oven liked to be coaxed to. It was more than just cooking, it was connection. It was how I showed I cared, how I kept the threads of our family woven tight. My son, Mark, grew up in that kitchen, his homework spread across the table while I kneaded dough, his friends raiding the fridge, his first clumsy attempts at making toast under my watchful eye. It held memories like the deep scratches in the butcher block, each one a story etched into the very fabric of the room. When he brought Sarah home, I welcomed her into that space, eager to share its warmth, its history, its language of love expressed through food. I taught her my grandmother's biscuit recipe, the trick to my famous Sunday gravy. I saw it as passing on a legacy, folding her into the family tapestry. She seemed interested, asked questions, took notes. I was happy. I thought she wanted to be a part of it, to learn the rhythms of our kitchen, the heartbeats of our home. I was naive. I mistook curiosity for respect and polite interest for genuine connection. I didn't see the calculating gleam in her eyes, not then. I didn't understand that she wasn't trying to join my world. She was observing it, cataloging its strengths and weaknesses, preparing to dismantle it piece by piece and build her own upon its ruins. The first signs were subtle, easy to dismiss. Small criticisms disguised as suggestions. Don't you think the pantry is a bit cluttered? As she rearranged jars she couldn't even identify. Are you sure you need all these different spatulas? As she eyed my collection with thinly veiled disdain. She started bringing her own ingredients, organic this, gluten-free that, ostentatiously placing them on the counter as if my pantry were a wasteland of processed mediocrity. She'd sigh dramatically if I used regular sugar instead of agave, or full-fat cream instead of some nut-based substitute that tasted like disappointment. It wasn't about health or preference, it was about control, about asserting her way as the only way, and by extension, making my way seem obsolete, inferior. Mark, caught in the middle, would just shrug or offer a weak, "Mom, maybe Sarah has a point." His voice, once a source of comfort, became another instrument of subtle alienation. He was changing, or perhaps I was finally seeing him clearly through the lens of her influence. The kitchen, my sanctuary, started to feel less like home and more like a battleground, fought not with raised voices, but with passive aggression and pointed silences. The air grew heavy, not with the scent of spices, but with unspoken tension. I found myself retreating, cooking less when they were around, the joy slowly draining away, replaced by a knot of anxiety in my stomach whenever I knew they were coming over. I told myself I was overreacting, that this was just the natural shift as a son builds his own life, his own family. But it felt different. It felt like an active pushing away, a deliberate erasure of my place, my history, my identity within their burgeoning unit. The kitchen, once my stage, became a space where I felt observed, judged, and found wanting. My movements were scrutinized, my methods questioned, my very presence seemed to disrupt the new order she was trying to impose. I remember trying to make the Thanksgiving dinner that year, as I always had. It was tradition, a meal passed down through generations, each dish holding a specific memory. Sarah hovered, rearranging things, tutoring about the amount of butter I used, suggesting alternative cooking methods that would, of course, be healthier and more modern. I felt like a guest in my own kitchen, a relic performing outdated rituals. The turkey, usually a symbol of our family gathered, felt heavy with the weight of her disapproval. I looked at Mark across the table, trying to catch his eye, a silent plea for understanding, for recognition of the history being served alongside the meal. He just smiled vaguely, absorbed in conversation with Sarah's mother. It was clear whose side he was on, whose world he now prioritized. The betrayal wasn't a sudden stab. It was a slow, insidious poison, leaching the warmth from my home, the love from my interactions. The ban didn't happen with a dramatic pronouncement at the head of the table, though the tension leading up to it was certainly dramatic enough. It was quieter, colder, delivered with a chilling blend of false concern and undeniable finality. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a rare visit during the week because Mark had promised to fix a leaky faucet. Sarah was with him, ostensibly helping, though mostly she stood back, directing him with imperious gestures and critiquing my choice of sink cleaner. I had decided, foolishly perhaps, to bake cookies. Simple chocolate chip, the kind Mark had loved since he was a boy. I thought the smell, the familiar comfort of it, might cut through the manufactured air of efficiency and control they brought with them. I was mixing the dough, the rhythmic scrape of the spoon against the bowl a familiar, soothing sound, when Sarah cleared her throat. I looked up, flour dusting my hands. Her expression was carefully composed, a practiced blend of sympathy and firmness. "Mary," she began, using my first name, which always felt slightly jarring from her, a deliberate informality that somehow felt more distant than Mom. "We need to talk." I stopped stirring. Mark busied himself with a wrench by the sink, his back to us. A classic Mark maneuver, avoiding conflict by pretending it wasn't happening. About the kitchen. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. The smell of melting butter and sugar seemed suddenly too sweet, too cloying. "Look, we appreciate everything you've done, all the meals over the years." "Everything I've done?" "This is my home, my life." But Mark and I were trying to establish our own routine, our own way of doing things. Her gaze swept over my mixer, the bowl of dough, the flour scattered on the counter. It felt like a physical assessment, a judgment of my methods, my right to even be standing there. "And frankly," she continued, her voice softening slightly, almost pityingly, "having you, well, having anyone else in the kitchen when we're here, it's just a little disruptive. It's confusing, having too many cooks, you know." She offered a small, tight smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "We think it would be best, when we visit, if you just let us handle things. Let us use the kitchen our way. It would simplify things. For everyone." My hands, coated in dough, felt suddenly heavy, clumsy. The rhythmic scraping stopped completely. You want me out of my own kitchen?" I managed, the words barely a whisper. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded small, fragile. She shifted her weight, adjusting her stance as if preparing for resistance she already knew wouldn't come. "It's not about out, Mary. It's about letting us take responsibility. We're adults now, we need to manage things ourselves." Manage things? This wasn't about managing, it was about excluding. It was about drawing a line, stark and undeniable, right through the heart of my home and placing me firmly on the outside. I looked at Mark again. He was still fiddling with the faucet, his shoulders hunched. He said nothing, not a word of protest, not a word of defense for me. His silence was the loudest part of the conversation. It was the confirmation that this wasn't just Sarah's idea, it was their idea. They wanted me out. The betrayal washed over me, cold and sharp, cutting deeper than any words Sarah could have spoken. It came from his silence, his passive agreement to her audacity. My son, who had eaten countless meals prepared by these hands in this kitchen, was standing by while his wife effectively banished me from it. The cookie dough felt disgusting, sticky, and alien. I wanted to throw the bowl against the wall, to scream, to demand they leave. But the quiet strength, the deep reservoir of resilience I didn't know I possessed, kicked in. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I looked at Sarah, her eyes watching me expectantly, gauging my reaction. I saw not just control, but a flicker of triumph. She had won this skirmish. "I see," I said, my voice low and steady now, devoid of emotion. "You want me out of the kitchen when you're here." I repeated it, making sure the brutal truth of it hung in the air, undeniable. She nodded, a small, satisfied dip of her head. "It's for the best. For the best." The words echoed in my mind later, long after they had left, the house silent save for the faint drip of the newly fixed faucet. For whose best? Certainly not mine. I stood alone in the kitchen, the abandoned bowl of dough on the counter, a monument to my failed attempt at connection. The space felt hollow, no longer warm and welcoming, but cold and alienating. The ban wasn't just about a room. It was about my role, my relevance, my very being within the family I had built. I was no longer the matriarch, the heart of the home. I was an inconvenience, an obstacle to be politely but firmly removed. The days that followed the kitchen ban were a blur of quiet misery. The house felt too large, too silent. The kitchen, once the vibrant hub, was now a museum of my former life, a place I avoided walking into when they were expected. If they visited, I would hover awkwardly in the living room, listening to the sounds of Sarah moving around my kitchen, the clatter of my pans, the whir of my blender, all used in ways that were not mine. It was an auditory torment, each sound a tiny hammer blow against my heart. I felt like a ghost in my own home, haunting the periphery of the life I had built. The humiliation was a constant, low thrum beneath everything. Humiliated by Sarah's dismissiveness, by Mark's complicity, by my own passive acceptance in the moment. I had always been the strong one, the one who held things together. But this felt different. This was a rejection so personal, so fundamental, that it shook me to my core. My identity was so intertwined with nurturing, with providing through food, that being told I wasn't needed, wasn't wanted, in that capacity felt like being told a fundamental part of me was obsolete. I spent hours sitting in my garden, watching the birds, trying to make sense of it all. How had it come to this? How had my son, who had once clung to my apron strings, allowed his wife to treat me with such blatant disrespect? Was their life together so fragile that my presence in the kitchen threatened it? Or was it simply about power, a deliberate move to cut the ties that bound Mark to me, leaving him solely dependent on her? The thoughts spiraled, dark and relentless. I felt a deep, aching loneliness. My friends tried to help, suggesting hobbies, distractions. "Take a painting class, Mary. Join a book club." They meant well, but they didn't understand. My passion wasn't a hobby, it was a way of life, a way of loving. You can't just replace a fundamental part of yourself with a pottery wheel. The bitterness festered. Every time I looked at my unused kitchen, at the gleaming, silent appliances, the locked cabinet with my special spices Sarah didn't trust me with, I felt a fresh wave of anger mixed with sorrow. What was the point of this beautiful home, built with love and sacrifice, if its heart was off limits to me? I thought about selling the house, running away from the memories, from the constant reminder of what I had lost. But where would I go? This was my home. Running wouldn't erase the feeling of being exiled from the very center of my life. The feeling of being redundant was perhaps the cruelest part. My son had his new family, his new way of doing things. They didn't need my cooking, my traditions, my presence in their space. I was a leftover, like a forgotten pot of soup gone cold. This period was the lowest point. Resignation started to set in, a heavy blanket of acceptance of this new, diminished reality. Maybe this was just how it was now. Maybe my role was simply to be the quiet, unobtrusive mother-in-law, invited only when necessary, seen but not heard, and certainly not smelling of garlic and roasted chicken. I started planning smaller meals for myself, just enough to get by. The joy of cooking was gone. It felt pointless, like rehearsing lines for a play you knew would never be performed. My hands, once busy and purposeful, felt idle, useless. The quiet of the house was broken only by my own footsteps, my own sighs. I stopped inviting people over, too ashamed to explain why I wasn't baking anymore, why the house felt so empty. The symbol of the locked spice cabinet became immense in my mind. It wasn't just spices. It was my knowledge, my history, my very essence being locked away, deemed unsafe or unnecessary by the new gatekeeper of my home's heart. The quiet strength I supposedly possessed felt non-existent. I felt weak, defeated, defined by what had been taken from me rather than by who I was. It was in this state of bleak emptiness, of wandering through rooms that felt less and less like my own, that a different kind of feeling began to stir, deep beneath the layers of hurt and resignation. It was a flicker, small and hesitant at first, like a pilot light refusing to be extinguished. A question whispered in the silence. Is this really it? Is this all that's left for me? The flicker grew, slow and persistent, fueled by the indignity, the injustice of it all. I wasn't just sad, I was angry. Deeply, fundamentally angry. Angry at Sarah for her calculated cruelty, angry at Mark for his cowardly silence, angry at myself for letting it happen. But anger, left unchecked, can be corrosive. I needed to channel it, to transform it into something constructive, something that would prove them wrong, not just about my place in the kitchen, but about my place in the world. I was sitting in my garden one afternoon, the sun warm on my face, trying to read, but the words blurring on the page. My mind kept drifting back to the kitchen, to the clatter I'd heard that morning when they came for coffee, the faint smell of Sarah's store-bought muffins wafting through the air, an insult carried on the breeze. And then it hit me, not as a gentle thought, but as a sudden, sharp jolt, like a current passing through me. They had banned me from my kitchen. Fine. If I couldn't cook in my kitchen, I would cook somewhere else. Somewhere bigger. Somewhere where I couldn't be banned. The thought was audacious, absurd, exhilarating. A restaurant. The word bloomed in my mind, large and vibrant, pushing back against the shadows of my despair. A restaurant was the ultimate kitchen, a public declaration of culinary purpose, a space where my skills wouldn't be just tolerated, but celebrated. It was the inverse of their banishment. They pushed me out of a private space. I would build a public one. It was crazy, of course. I was in my late 50s, no business experience, just a lifetime of cooking for love, not profit. Where would I even start? But the idea lodged itself in my brain and refused to budge. It felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. It wasn't just about cooking, it was about reclaiming my worth, my identity. It was about taking the very thing they had tried to take away, my connection to food, my ability to nourish and bring joy through it, and amplifying it tenfold. It was defiance in its purest form. I started doing research, late at night, hidden away in my study. I Googled buying a restaurant, starting a food business. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, filled with jargon about permits, licenses, business plans, overheads. It seemed impossible. There were moments of doubt, waves of insecurity that threatened to drown the nascent idea. Who are you kidding, Mary? You're a home cook. You'll fail. You'll lose everything. These were the voices of my fear, amplified by the subtle suggestions of inadequacy I had internalized over months of Sarah's passive aggression. But beneath the fear was the stubborn spark of anger and a growing sense of purpose. I thought of Sarah in my kitchen, presiding over my things, acting like she owned the place. The image was a powerful motivator. No, I wouldn't be defeated. I wouldn't fade away into quiet irrelevance. I had a lifetime of skill, of passion, of love to give through food. And if my own family didn't want it, I would find others who did. The restaurant became a symbol of my refusal to be diminished. It wasn't just a place to cook, it was a statement. A declaration of independence. A testament to resilience. It was the ultimate irony. They banned me from the small, private kitchen that was the heart of my home, and in doing so, they pushed me towards creating a large, public kitchen that would become the heart of my new life. The idea wasn't just about revenge, though a part of me relished the thought of their faces when they found out. It was about survival. It was about finding a new purpose when the old one had been cruelly taken away. It was about proving to myself, more than anyone else, that I was still capable, still relevant, still full of flavor and life, even if my own family couldn't see it or didn't want to. The journey ahead seemed daunting, filled with unknowns. But for the first time in months, I felt a stir of excitement, a sense of possibility that stretched beyond the familiar, stifling walls of my home. The seed was planted and watered with the bitter tears of betrayal. It began to grow. Finding the right place wasn't easy. It was like searching for a new heart when your old one had been bruised and neglected. I looked at several properties, each one feeling slightly wrong. Too big, too small, wrong location, dilapidated state. It felt like an extension of my internal state. Everything felt a bit broken, needing repair. I worked mostly in secret. I didn't tell Mark or Sarah, of course. That would have invited immediate opposition, doubt, and probably mockery. I told a close friend, Eleanor, who was initially shocked but quickly became my staunchest supporter. She had seen the light drain from my eyes over the past year and recognized the spark, however improbable, as a sign of life returning. She helped me research, connected me with a commercial real estate agent, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda who had seen it all. Brenda didn't patronize me. She saw my determination, listened to my vision, which was, admittedly, still forming. A place that felt like home, served simple, delicious food made with care, a place where people felt welcomed and nourished. Not fancy, not trendy, just good, honest food and warmth. Then Brenda called me about the Corner Bistro. It had been a respectable, if unremarkable, neighborhood restaurant for years, run by an aging couple who were finally retiring. It wasn't glamorous, needed some updating, but it had good bones, a loyal local clientele, and, most importantly, a large, well-equipped kitchen. When I walked in, I felt it. It wasn't my home kitchen, filled with personal history, but it had a welcoming aura, a sense of potential. The kitchen was spacious, functional, with a large range, ample counter space, walk-in refrigerators. It was clean, organized, a professional space built for the very thing I had been denied. Standing in the center of that empty kitchen, I closed my eyes and could almost hear the sizzle of pans, the hum of ovens, the gentle clatter of plates, the symphony of a working kitchen. It felt right. It felt like coming home, but to a different, larger home I had yet to build. The process of buying it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. There was endless paperwork, meetings with lawyers, bankers. Numbers I barely understood, contracts filled with clauses that made my head spin. My life savings, painstakingly accumulated over decades, were on the line. Every signature felt like a leap of faith into a vast unknown. There were moments, late at night, staring at spreadsheets, when panic would set in. What if I failed? What if I lost everything? What if Sarah and Mark were right, implicitly, that I was just a home cook, incapable of operating on this scale? But then I would remember the feeling of standing in my own kitchen, being told I wasn't welcome, the cold, hard look in Sarah's eyes, the indifference in Mark's. And the fear would recede, replaced by a fierce resolve. I wouldn't go back to that. I couldn't. This restaurant wasn't just a business venture. It was my escape route, my declaration of independence. It was a tangible act of defiance. I was building something new, something entirely mine, from the ashes of what had been taken. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had confined my culinary world to the smallest, most private space, and in response, I was expanding it to a large, public domain. My kitchen, once hidden away behind closed doors, would now be open for all to see, to taste, to experience. The restaurant became my focus, my obsession. I poured all my energy into it, channeling the frustration, the hurt, the suppressed creativity of the past year into planning menus, envisioning the dining room, hiring staff. I hired a young, enthusiastic chef, a few reliable waitstaff. I told them my vision, Simple, comforting food made with love, a place where everyone felt like family. They seemed to catch my enthusiasm. The atmosphere was already different from my home, open, collaborative, hopeful. This new kitchen, unlike my old one under Sarah's gaze, felt like a place of possibility, not restriction. As the renovations began, the smell of fresh paint and sawdust replaced the ghosts of old meals. The physical transformation of the restaurant mirrored the internal transformation happening within me. I was shedding the skin of the hurt mother-in-law, the banished home cook, and stepping into the role of a business owner, a restaurateur. It was daunting, yes, but it was also incredibly empowering. The day I finally told Mark and Sarah about the restaurant was carefully chosen. I waited until the purchase was finalized, the renovations were well underway, and there was no turning back. I invited them over for dinner, a neutral setting away from my now complicated kitchen. I cooked a simple meal, something I could manage easily. The tension in the house was still palpable whenever they were present, a silent acknowledgement of the boundary that had been drawn. We ate, making polite conversation about work and the weather. Mark seemed distracted. Sarah was her usual composed self, occasionally casting a critical eye around the dining room, perhaps assessing its outdated decor. As dessert was served, I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, a mixture of nerves and anticipation. This was it, the moment of revelation. Mark, Sarah, I began, my voice steady, stronger than I expected. There's something I need to tell you. They both looked at me, a flicker of curiosity in their eyes. As you know, I continued, choosing my words carefully. I've had a lot of time on my hands lately. I let the slight irony of that hang in the air. Sarah's expression remained placid, but Mark shifted uncomfortably. And I've been doing some thinking about what I want to do with the next chapter of my life. I paused, building the suspense. I've decided to buy a restaurant. Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Mark's fork clattered against his plate. Sarah's eyes widened, the carefully constructed composure cracking for just a second, revealing pure disbelief. A restaurant? Mark stammered, looking at me as if I'd just announced I was joining the circus. Yes, I confirmed, a small smile playing on my lips. It's called the Corner Bistro. I've bought it and I'm reopening it soon. Sarah found her voice, though it was pitched slightly higher than usual. But why? You don't know anything about running a restaurant. The condescension was back, sharp and automatic. I know about cooking, I said, meeting her gaze directly. And I know about making people feel welcome. The rest, I'll learn. But Mom, Mark said, sounding genuinely bewildered, that's a huge undertaking. And, well, where did you get the money? He looked around the dining room, the familiar surroundings suddenly seeming at odds with my announcement. I used my savings, I stated simply. The savings that were meant for my retirement, for travel, maybe to help them out someday. Now, they were invested entirely in myself, in this new venture. Sarah's face paled slightly. The thought of me having significant funds she didn't know about, and that I was using them for something outside her control, was clearly unsettling to her. But that's risky, Mary. Very risky, she said, her tone shifting from dismissiveness to a feigned concern that felt utterly false. What if it fails? Then it fails, I replied, my voice firm. But I don't intend for it to fail. I intend for it to succeed. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't just shock. It was the dawning realization that I had made a significant move entirely outside their sphere of influence, a move born directly from their actions, yet one that empowered me, not them. The irony was delicious. They had tried to make me smaller, to confine me, and instead, they had inadvertently pushed me towards something bigger than I had ever imagined for myself. My banishment from their kitchen table had led me to build a table for dozens, perhaps hundreds of others. They saw not just a restaurant, but a consequence they had not anticipated. The power dynamic had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. I was no longer the supplicant hoping for a place in their kitchen. I was the woman who had built her own kitchen, her own world, separate and independent from theirs. The dessert sat untouched. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and dawning understanding. They had banned me from the kitchen, thinking it would diminish me. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The opening day of The Corner Bistro was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, a symphony of clattering plates, sizzling oil, and the murmur of excited voices. Standing in the pass, watching the dishes go out, each one a culmination of my skills, my recipes, my vision, felt surreal. It was nothing like the quiet, often tense experience of cooking in my home kitchen under Sarah's watchful eye. This was expansive, collaborative, vibrant. My staff, a mix of seasoned professionals and eager newcomers, moved with purpose, their energy infectious. The young chef I'd hired, David, was talented and respected my experience, eager to learn my techniques while bringing his own modern flair. We worked together seamlessly, a partnership built on mutual respect for food and the craft of cooking, a stark contrast to the hierarchy and criticism I had faced at home. The dining room, refurbished with warm colors, comfortable seating, and local art, felt welcoming. People arrived, filling the tables, their faces alight with curiosity and anticipation. It was a neighborhood place, and many faces were familiar: neighbors, acquaintances, people who had known me simply as Mary next door. Now, they saw me in a different light, the woman who had dared to start something new. The menu was a reflection of my life, elevated for a restaurant setting. Comfort food with a touch of elegance. My signature chicken pot pie, perfected over 30 years. A rich, slow-simmered beef stew like the one my mother used to make. A lemon cake that was impossibly light and flavorful. These were the dishes born in my home kitchen, the ones that Sarah had deemed too simple, too old-fashioned, now being served to a room full of appreciative customers. Each positive review, each empty plate returned to the kitchen, felt like a small victory, a quiet vindication. This was proof that my way had value, that there was a hunger for the kind of nurturing, soul-warming food I knew how to create. I spent most of the evening in the kitchen, supervising, plating, stepping in wherever needed. It was hard work, physically demanding in a way my home cooking never was. My feet ached, my hands were stained, but I felt more alive than I had in years. This was purpose. This was relevance. This was mine. I hadn't invited Mark or Sarah for the opening. It felt too vulnerable, too soon. I wanted this space to be established, solid, before exposing it to their potential negativity. But word travels fast in a small community. I knew they would hear about it. My friend Eleanor came, beaming with pride, filling me in on the buzz in the dining room. "People love it, Mary," she whispered, squeezing my arm. "They absolutely love it." Her words were a balm to my soul, a confirmation that I hadn't just chased a pipe dream. I had built something real, something that resonated with people. There was a moment, during a brief lull between the dinner rush and the dessert orders, when I stepped out of the kitchen and looked across the bustling dining room. Seeing tables full of people laughing, talking, savoring the food I had created, a wave of emotion washed over me. It was bittersweet. I had created this vibrant community around food, something I had tried to do within my own family, only to be shut out. This success felt like a triumph, but it also highlighted the emptiness where my family should have been. My son should have been here, proud of his mother, celebrating this incredible achievement. But he wasn't. He was likely at home, perhaps eating something bland and healthy prepared by Sarah, oblivious or indifferent to the world I was building just miles away. The contrast was stark. In my home kitchen, I had been confined, criticized, ultimately banned. In this commercial kitchen, I was free, respected, empowered. The banishment hadn't been an ending, it had been a redirection. They had closed one door, and in doing so, had forced me to open 100 new ones. The energy of the evening, the positive feedback, the sheer accomplishment of pulling it off, filled me with a quiet but profound sense of empowerment. I had taken the pain of betrayal and transmuted it into something beautiful, something that nourished others. My hands, once idle and questioning their purpose, were now busy, purposeful, creating and giving in a way they hadn't been allowed to for too long. The success of the corner bistro wasn't overnight, but it was steady. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood and beyond. My comfort food, made with care and quality ingredients, resonated with people. My story, whispered among patrons, the woman who opened a restaurant after being banned from her own kitchen, added a layer of intrigue and perhaps a touch of local legend. I wasn't just serving food, I was serving a narrative of resilience. I was there every day, hands-on, involved in every aspect from developing new dishes to chatting with customers in the dining room. I discovered a joy in the work that was different from home cooking, but equally fulfilling. It was the satisfaction of building something from the ground up, of creating jobs for my staff, of becoming a small, but meaningful, part of the community's fabric. My kitchen staff became like a new family. We shared meals, we problem-solved together, we celebrated small victories. It was a supportive, collaborative environment, so different from the stifling atmosphere of my home. I learned to delegate, to trust others, skills I hadn't needed in my solitary home kitchen. As the restaurant thrived, my confidence grew. The quiet strength that had helped me through the dark months of the ban began to manifest more outwardly. I found my voice in negotiating with suppliers, managing staff, making decisions. The woman who had felt small and insignificant in her own home was now a respected business owner, known for her delicious food and her quiet determination. Of course, the news eventually reached Mark and Sarah. I didn't announce it to them formally after the initial shock. They heard it through the grapevine, through mutual acquaintances, perhaps even saw the restaurant bustling as they drove by. Their reactions, filtered back to me through others or glimpsed during infrequent, awkward family gatherings, were varied. Disbelief first, then grudging acknowledgement, sometimes tinged with annoyance. They couldn't ignore it. It was too visible, too successful. Neighbors would compliment me on the restaurant in front of them, and I would see the subtle tightening of Sarah's jaw, the uncomfortable shifting of Mark's weight. The irony was a constant, unspoken guest at these gatherings. They had created a vacuum in my life, and I had filled it with something far grander than they could have anticipated. The banishment had backfired spectacularly. One evening, Mark called. It was the first time he had initiated a call in months that wasn't about logistics for a visit. His voice was hesitant. "Mom," he started, I heard the restaurant is doing really well." "Yes, Mark, it is," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Oh, that's great." There was an awkward pause. Sarah and I were thinking, maybe we could come by sometime? See it? The invitation was carefully extended, a tentative step into my new world. "You're welcome to visit," I said. "During business hours, of course." "It's quite busy." I didn't offer a special time, a VIP tour. They would come as customers, like anyone else. The shift in dynamic was subtle, but significant. They were no longer dictating the terms of our interactions in my space. They were seeking entry into a space I had created. The restaurant wasn't just a business, it was a boundary. A physical manifestation of my independence. It was a place where I set the rules, where my skills were valued, where I was the one in control. They came a few weeks later, on a busy Saturday night. I saw them walk in, Sarah scanning the full dining room, a flicker of surprise on her face. They waited for a table like everyone else. I didn't go over immediately, letting them experience the atmosphere I had created. I saw Mark look around, perhaps searching for a glimpse of the home he knew in this public space. I imagined him comparing the bustling energy of the restaurant kitchen, which was partially visible from the dining room, to the sterile silence of my home kitchen. When I finally went over to their table, I was calm, composed. "Welcome to the Corner Bistro," I said, a polite, professional smile on my face. Sarah offered a strained smile in return. Mark looked uncertain. "Mom, "This is amazing," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "It's buzzing." "Yes, we've been very fortunate," I replied. They ordered their food, hesitating slightly over some of the dishes, the comfort food perhaps too simple, too much like the things they had rejected. I left them to their meal, returning to the kitchen, my domain. I watched them from a distance as they ate, observed their reactions. Sarah picked at her food, her eyes darting around the room, assessing, perhaps critiquing. Mark ate slowly, contemplatively. I wondered what was going through his mind. Did he remember the taste of these dishes from his childhood? Did he see the connection between the mother who cooked for him then and the woman who owned this successful restaurant now? The visit was short, slightly strained. When they left, Mark hugged me awkwardly. "It's really impressive, Mom," he said again, sincerity in his voice. Sarah gave a brief nod. "Yes, Mary. Quite the undertaking." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the banishment that had led to this. But it didn't matter. Their presence here, in my restaurant, witnessing my success, was acknowledgement enough. They had tried to silence me in my kitchen, and I had built a stage where my cooking, my passion, my strength could not be ignored. The bitterness hadn't entirely faded, but it was now tempered with a deep, abiding sense of empowerment. I had lost a connection to my family home, but I had found a new home, a new family, and a new, stronger version of myself in the process. The ban from the kitchen hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. Running the restaurant wasn't just about cooking and managing. It became an ongoing process of self-discovery and healing. Each day presented new challenges, from staffing issues to supplier problems, from unexpected equipment failures to the sheer exhaustion of working long hours on my feet. But with each challenge overcome, my confidence solidified. I found a resilience I didn't know I had, a practical problem-solving ability sharpened by necessity. I learned to trust my instincts, to make quick decisions, and to stand firm when needed. The quiet strength had transformed into a quiet authority. My interactions with Mark and Sarah remained infrequent and somewhat strained. They visited the restaurant a few more times, always during peak hours, almost as if they wanted to be swallowed by the crowd, to avoid any meaningful conversation. They would compliment the food, express surprise at the volume of business, but the underlying tension, the unspoken history of the kitchen ban, was always there, a ghost at the table. It became clear that they couldn't fully bridge the gap that had formed. My success, born of their actions, seemed to be a constant, uncomfortable reminder. Sarah's initial dismissiveness had been replaced by a wary respect, tinged with resentment. Mark seemed genuinely proud in moments, but still struggled to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the businesswoman I had become. He never apologized for his silence during the banishment, never truly acknowledged the depth of the hurt. And perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps admitting his part in it would have meant confronting uncomfortable truths about his own choices, his own priorities. I stopped waiting for an apology. I realized that my healing, my moving forward, couldn't be contingent on their recognition of the wrong they had done. It had to come from within. My focus shifted entirely to the restaurant, to my staff, to my customers. This was where my energy was reciprocated, where my efforts bore fruit. I built genuine connections with my team, becoming a mentor, a friend, a mother figure to some of the younger staff. I learned their stories, celebrated their successes, supported them through difficulties. This new chosen family filled the void left by the fracturing of my biological one. The restaurant became more than a place of work. It was a community, a haven. The symbolic object in my life had shifted. The locked spice cabinet in my home kitchen, once a painful symbol of exclusion, was now just a cabinet. The restaurant itself was the new symbol, a symbol of liberation, of empowerment, of a life rebuilt on a foundation of resilience. It represented possibility, abundance, connection. I still lived in my home, of course. The kitchen was no longer a place of dread, but it still felt quiet. I used it for simple things, morning coffee, a quick meal. But the grander cooking, the passionate creation, happened elsewhere. The contrast between the two spaces was a constant, lived reminder of my journey. One kitchen represented confinement and past hurt. The other represented freedom and future possibility. As time went on, the raw pain of the betrayal softened, replaced by a bittersweet acceptance. I had lost something precious, the easy, comfortable intimacy with my son, the shared traditions in the heart of my home. But I had gained something invaluable, a profound sense of self-worth, independence, and the knowledge that I was capable of far more than I ever imagined. The daughter-in-law's ban had been intended to shrink my world, to make me smaller, more manageable. Instead, it had forced me to expand, to create a world where I was not only allowed, but celebrated. It was a dark chapter, undoubtedly, filled with hurt and disillusionment. But it had led to this redemptive outcome, a life rich with purpose, connection, and the quiet satisfaction of having turned adversity into opportunity. My story wasn't a tale of simple revenge, but of complex resilience. It was about finding empowerment not by tearing others down, but by building oneself up, higher and stronger than before. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, Sarah came into the restaurant alone. It was an unexpected visit, and the restaurant was only moderately busy. I was at the counter, going over invoices. When I saw her, my stomach tightened slightly, but I remained calm. "Sarah," I greeted her, my voice polite but reserved. She looked different, less composed than usual, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Hesitation in her eyes. She sat at a small table by the window, and I went over, taking a seat across from her. "Can I get you something? Coffee?" "Just water, please, Mary." I signaled to a server, who brought her a glass of water. We sat in silence for a moment, the background noise of the restaurant filling the space between us. She stirred her water with a finger, avoiding my gaze. "Mary," she began, her voice low. I wanted to talk to you." This was new. Our previous interactions had been carefully superficial. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. About the kitchen. "At your house." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. "Yes," I prompted, keeping my expression neutral. I realize now that what I did, it was wrong. The admission was quiet, almost mumbled, but the words were clear. It was wrong. After all this time, the acknowledgement. A wave of complex emotions washed over me, surprise, a flicker of satisfaction, but mostly a profound sense of detachment. It felt like an admission arriving years too late, after the wound had closed and scarred over, after I had built an entirely new life around it. "It caused a lot of hurt," I said, stating the simple truth. "Yes," she conceded, finally meeting my eyes. They were softer than I had ever seen them. "I see that now. Mark sees it too." Seeing all of this, she gestured around the busy restaurant. "It made us understand what that kitchen meant to you, what cooking means to you, and what we took away." Her gaze was steady now, and I saw a genuine flicker of regret. We were building our own life, our own space, and I felt threatened, I think, by your closeness with Mark, by the traditions. I wanted to make our own, and I went about it in a terrible way. She paused, searching for words. "I didn't mean to banish you. Not really. I just wanted control. And I didn't realize that in trying to take control of a room, I was damaging everything else." The admission hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. It was more than I had ever expected from her. But the years of hurt, the struggle, the rebuilding, that couldn't be erased by a single conversation. "It changed things, Sarah," I said gently. "It changed me. It changed my relationship with Mark. It forced me onto a different path." "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry, Mary. Truly sorry." The apology felt sincere, finally. But sincerity now didn't undo the pain of before. Apologies they're complicated, aren't they? I mused, looking out the window at the street beyond. They can't turn back time. They can't unbreak things. But they're a start. I looked back at her. Thank you for saying that, Sarah. It means something. Even now. I didn't offer immediate forgiveness, didn't invite her back into my home kitchen, didn't pretend that everything was suddenly okay. It wasn't. The scars remained. But the raw wound was no longer open. This conversation, however late, felt like a final, necessary step in processing the past. It confirmed that they understood the magnitude of their actions, not just the superficial inconvenience, but the deep emotional impact. It also confirmed that I had moved beyond needing their validation. My worth, my success, my happiness were now independent of their approval or regret. The power dynamic had inverted completely. They had tried to make me small, and I had grown immense. They had tried to silence me in my private space, and I had found my voice in a public forum. The conversation with Sarah was a turning point, not in magically restoring what was lost, but in clearing the air, acknowledging the past hurt, and allowing a tentative path forward, however different. The relationship with Mark remained complex. He visited the restaurant more often after Sarah's visit, sometimes alone, sometimes with her. He seemed more at ease, though a shadow of regret often lingered in his eyes. We talked about the business, about life, but the deep, easy intimacy of before was gone, replaced by a more cautious, adult interaction. He never explicitly apologized like Sarah did, but his increased presence, his quiet support for the restaurant, felt like his way of acknowledging the journey I'd been forced to take and, perhaps, his part in it. I learned to accept this new dynamic. Our relationship had been irrevocably changed by the kitchen ban, forged in the fires of betrayal and resilience. It wasn't the relationship I'd had, the one I'd perhaps always wanted, the son who stood unequivocally by his mother. But it was a relationship built on the reality of who we were now, shaped by the choices we had made. My focus remained primarily on the corner bistro. It had become my life's work, my community, my source of joy and purpose. It thrived, expanding its hours, hiring more staff, becoming a true heart of the neighborhood. I developed new recipes, hosted community events, mentored young cooks. My hands, once idle and unsure, were now constantly busy, creating, nurturing, building. The restaurant was a living testament to the fact that being banished from one space didn't mean the end of your story. It could be the catalyst for building something even greater, a wider, more inclusive space, where your talents could flourish without restriction. The irony of the situation never completely faded, but it transformed from a source of bitter resentment into a quiet, almost humorous observation on the unpredictable turns life could take. They had closed a door on me, and I had built a whole new house. The power dynamic was permanently inverted. I was no longer defined by my role within their family unit or confined by the boundaries they had tried to set. I was defined by my own accomplishments, my own strength, the world I had built from scratch. The bittersweetness remained. The success of the restaurant, the empowerment I felt, was real and deeply satisfying. But there were still moments, quiet evenings alone in my home, when I missed the ease of cooking a simple meal for my son, the unburdened laughter in my own kitchen. Those moments were less frequent now, overshadowed by the fulfillment of my new life. I had found redemption not in reconciliation with the past, but in radical creation in the present. The woman who had been quietly devastated by a simple banishment was now a formidable force, respected in her community, proud of what she had built. The kitchen ban, intended as an act of control and diminishment, had ultimately been an act of accidental liberation. It had freed me from a role that had become stifling and pushed me towards a future I never would have dared to dream of on my own. My hands, the hands that had kneaded dough and stirred sauces for my family, now held the keys to a restaurant, a symbol of my resilience, my spirit, and the flavorful, abundant life I had created on my own terms. The journey had been painful, marked by betrayal and loss, but it had led me here, standing tall in the center of my own bustling kitchen, the undisputed heart of a world I had built, plate by plate, triumph by triumph. And in that space, there was no room for banishment, only room for creation, connection, and the quiet, powerful satisfaction of a life reclaimed. The seasons turned. The corner bistro adapted, changing menus with fresh local produce, hosting holiday events, becoming a fixture. My life had a rhythm now dictated by the restaurant's beat, not the hesitant visits of my family. I saw less of Mark and Sarah, their lives continuing on their own trajectory, separate from the vibrant world I had built. Our encounters, when they happened, were polite, distant echoes of what once was. The house, my original home, felt increasingly like just a place to sleep, the memories in the kitchen dulled by time and the creation of so many new ones elsewhere. I thought about selling it sometimes, about moving closer to the restaurant, into a smaller, more manageable space. But there was a stubborn part of me that clung to the old house. It was where my children grew up, where my life with their father unfolded. And the kitchen, though no longer the center of my culinary world, was still a repository of history. The ban had stripped it of its present function in my life, but not its past significance. It stood as a silent witness to the turning point, the place where everything changed. I hired a young woman, Maria, to be my general manager. She was sharp, enthusiastic, and quickly learned the ropes. I began to think about the future, about succession. The restaurant was my legacy now, not just recipes passed down, but a successful business, a community hub, a testament to resilience. I wanted it to continue, to flourish, long after I was ready to hang up my apron for good. Sharing my knowledge, mentoring Maria and others on my staff, felt like a new form of nurturing, a way of passing on not just cooking techniques, but lessons learned about life, about bouncing back, about finding your passion and holding onto it fiercely. My hands were still busy, teaching, guiding, creating. The kitchen ban had stripped me of one audience, one set of recipients for my culinary love language, but it had opened me up to an entire community eager to receive it. This abundance of connection, of purpose, was the true inverse of their attempted scarcity. My relationship with my son, Mark, remained in that complex space, affection mixed with distance, understanding laced with lingering hurt. We would talk on the phone, brief updates on our lives. He seemed genuinely happy for my success, even if he struggled to fully participate in it. I knew, deep down, that he felt guilt, perhaps even regret, for his passive role in the banishment. But we never had another conversation like the one with Sarah. Some things, once broken, can only be pieced back together imperfectly, the cracks visible reminders of where the stress points were. And that was okay. I had stopped needing his full understanding or his perfect apology to validate my life. My validation came from the steady hum of the restaurant, the happy faces of my customers, the camaraderie of my staff, the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had built this, piece by piece, against the odds. Sarah's apology had offered a form of closure, a confirmation that the wrong was acknowledged. Mark's quieter support, his visits to the restaurant, offered a different kind of closure, an acceptance, perhaps, that my path had diverged, and while he might not fully comprehend it, he could respect it. The emotional tone of my life had settled into a place of empowered reflection. The raw pain was gone, the resignation a distant memory. There was still a touch of bittersweetness, a quiet acknowledgement of the family dynamic that wouldn't be fully healed. But the dominant feeling was one of profound gratitude and strength. I had been pushed out, told I was no longer needed in a space that defined me, and in response, I had built an empire of flavor, a sanctuary of belonging, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a woman who refused to be silenced, refused to be diminished. The banishment wasn't a defeat. It was the fertile ground from which my greatest victory grew. My days were long but full. The restaurant demanded my energy, my attention, my passion, and it gave back in abundance. The exhaustion at the end of a busy shift was a satisfying weariness, the feeling of having poured myself into something tangible and meaningful. I found unexpected joy in the mundane tasks, counting inventory, balancing the books, training new staff. Each task, no matter how small, was a part of the larger whole, the vibrant ecosystem of the restaurant that had replaced the quiet solitude of my home life. My hands, once skilled only in the intimate act of cooking for a few, were now capable of orchestrating meals for dozens, managing staff, making business decisions. It was a different kind of nurturing, a different kind of creation, but it was still deeply rooted in my desire to provide, to connect, to bring people together around food. The irony of the situation continued to weave its way through my thoughts, not with bitterness, but with a kind of wry amusement. They had wanted to clear their space, to establish their control, and in doing so, they had cleared a path for me to take up more space, to exert my control over an entire establishment. The kitchen in my home remained largely unused for anything beyond personal necessity. It felt strange sometimes, walking past the gleaming appliances, the silent mixer, the now unlocked but still largely unused spice cabinet. It was a shrine to a past life, a different era. The energy, the life, the heart of my culinary world was now miles away, in the bustling, aromatic kitchen of the corner bistro. This physical separation mirrored the emotional distance that had grown between me and the life I once expected to live, a life centered around my son, his family, the traditions of our home. That life had ended when the kitchen door was effectively closed in my face. But the ending had not been a finality. It had been a redirection, a forcing function that pushed me toward a destiny I wouldn't have had the courage or the necessity to pursue otherwise. The raw emotion had settled into a deep, quiet pool of reflection. I thought about the nature of family, of expectation, of betrayal, and of resilience. Family ties were complex, not always neat or easy. Sometimes, the people who were supposed to lift you up were the ones who inadvertently or deliberately cut you loose. But being cut loose didn't mean you would drift away. It could mean you would learn to swim stronger, faster, towards a shore you hadn't even known existed. The restaurant was that shore. It was a tangible embodiment of my resilience, a place where the quiet strength that had been tested and tempered by betrayal could finally thrive openly. It was a dark beginning, born from hurt and rejection, but the outcome was undeniably redemptive. I had taken the ingredients of my pain and transformed them into a feast of purpose, independence, and joy. The quiet strength I possessed was no longer just a shield against hurt. It was the engine that powered my new life, the foundation upon which I had built a world where I was not just welcomed, but essential. My hands, these hands that had been banned from the simple act of making cookies in a family kitchen, were now shaping a legacy, one dish, one customer, one day at a time, in a kitchen that was truly, gloriously mine. And in that vast, public space, filled with the warmth of ovens and the laughter of people, I found a fulfillment that no single family kitchen, however beloved, could ever have contained. The final act of my story isn't a dramatic confrontation or a perfect reconciliation. It's quieter, more reflective, settling into the reality of a life that has been irrevocably reshaped. The corner bistro continued to flourish. I wasn't there quite as much anymore, having successfully transitioned more of the day-to-day management to Maria and my capable staff. I spent my time developing new recipes, planning future events, connecting with local suppliers, and occasionally, still stepping onto the line during busy periods, the familiar heat and energy still a comfort. My hands, though older now, still moved with practiced ease, a lifetime of knowledge etched into their movements. The restaurant was a well-oiled machine, a testament to vision, hard work, and the power of finding purpose. Mark and Sarah visited less frequently, their lives busy with their own concerns. Our phone calls became less frequent too, dwindling to occasional texts or holiday greetings. The distance wasn't hostile. It was simply the natural consequence of divergent paths, of a foundational relationship that had shifted in ways that couldn't be fully repaired. The bittersweetness was a constant companion, a low hum beneath the satisfaction of my life. I had built something remarkable, something entirely my own, finding profound fulfillment and a new community. But the cost had been a degree of separation from my son that I hadn't anticipated, even when the banishment occurred. It was a trade-off, perhaps, that life sometimes demanded, personal flourishing purchased at the price of familial closeness. I didn't regret buying the restaurant. Not for a single moment. It had saved me, given me purpose, shown me my own strength. It was my creation, my triumph. But the hole where a different kind of family closeness might have been remained, a quiet ache that reminded me of the complex, sometimes painful, realities of love and family. The kitchen in my home remained quiet. I eventually decided to renovate it, not to make it functional for grand meals, the restaurant was for that, but to make it a comfortable, simple space for myself. I removed the locked spice cabinet, replacing it with open shelving for a few essentials. The change felt symbolic, a final release of the pain associated with that particular detail of the banishment. It was just a room again, a nice room, but no longer the charged, central battleground of my life. My true kitchen, my heart's kitchen, was now public, expansive, open to all. It was a place of abundance, not restriction. Of welcome, not banishment. The journey from the shock and humiliation of being told I wasn't welcome in my own kitchen to the quiet pride of owning and running a successful restaurant had been long and arduous, filled with doubt, anger, and ultimately, a deep wellspring of resilience. It was a story of betrayal, yes, but more profoundly, it was a story of reinvention. Of taking the very thing that was meant to diminish you and using it as the fuel to become larger, stronger, more fully yourself than you ever thought possible. My hands, the hands that had once trembled with hurt and confusion, were now steady, capable, building a legacy not just of food, but of strength. The daughter-in-law's ban hadn't been the end of my story. It had been the most unexpected, most challenging, and ultimately, most empowering chapter. And in the warm, bustling heart of the corner bistro, surrounded by the symphony of a working kitchen and the happy murmurs of satisfied customers, I knew that I had not just bought a restaurant. I had bought back my life.